Hello everybody, it is April 2nd, 2025, here in the United States of America, currently in the very stormy state of Ohio. We are in the middle of a thunderstorm right now, but I am scheduled to do a video every Wednesday, so if power goes out, or if there's any very, very loud crashing sounds, well, so be it. But I think in today's video, I'd like to talk about, let me adjust this camera a little bit here. Sorry about that. Okay. Anywho, in today's video, I'd like to talk about this idea of peace through strength that President Donald Trump has. Do I think it's a viable strategy for actually achieving peace? Now, Donald Trump, despite what some of his critics may say, I do believe is interested in being a president that's known as a peacemaker. He wants a legacy that is going to stand the test of time, and I do think he's legitimately not interested in getting the United States directly involved in any conflicts and wars while he's in office. That was a big selling point from his first term. He would reiterate again and again, remember, I got the United States in no new wars. And this was in response to Joe Biden and his administration's foolish and haphazard policy in regards to Russia. During the Biden administration, we were much closer to an accidental nuclear confrontation than many people would like to admit. I thought the policy of the Biden administration was foolish, was belligerent. It was based off of complete misunderstanding of the situation that it faced and the country that it was picking a fight with. I thought the entire policy was guided by people that have no real military understanding of basically anything and no practical sense. I mean, the policy that the previous administration had in regards to Russia would have been completely unthinkable during the Cold War. Now, despite the tensions between the USSR and NATO during the Cold War, there were still back channels and lines of communication open the entire time, and Western powers knew better than to actually give weapons to a country in conflict with the Soviet Union that would be used to strike Soviet soil out of fear of that spiraling into a nuclear catastrophe. The leaders that both sides had in the Cold War, I think we're all very fortunate that those leaders were in charge at the time that they were, because the Cold War easily could have escalated into the end of the world as we know it. But today's policy from the West in regards to Russia seems foolish and belligerent and based off this idea that, well, Russia's weak and you can always just call its bluff and they're a paper tiger and they're one more sanction away from completely falling apart. We've heard that for 3 years and that hasn't happened yet. But anyways, what I wanted to get back to though was Trump's different approach, and I'm not just talking about Russia. It's Trump's approach in general to preventing conflicts. It's risky. It seems like he's constantly playing chicken with other countries. Now, the honest truth is, most countries don't want a direct military confrontation with the United States. I would say, despite the current state of the U.S. military not being quite what it was, I'd say during the height of the Cold War, quite what it was even in 1991, the United States military is still an extremely potent force. And you have people on the other side that say, the United States is married to old doctrines in regards to its carrier fleets. It uses weapons that are too expensive. They can't produce as many of them as they should. The quality of the infantry has degraded somewhat. No, that's true to a degree, but in regards to strength comparisons between the United States, Russia, and China, the United States is still, I'd say, probably the more powerful of the three, although the gap is quickly closing. It doesn't have the unassailable advantages that it used to have, especially back in 1991, but the United States is still a potent enough of a military force for most nations to shy away from any kind of direct conflict with the United States. Now, in regards to this peace through strength policy that Trump seems to have, it's based off of, well, do what we say or we will possibly use military force. Now, that has more to do with Iran than anything else. I think one of the biggest problems that the Trump administration has in regards to Iran, and one of the reasons for its belligerence, is the influence of the Israel lobby in the United States. Israel does have a very, very powerful lobby and a lot of influence in the United States. Everybody knows it. This isn't some kind of secret. Nobody even really denies it at this point. AIPAC is a thing, and Trump gets a lot of money from people that are very, very pro-Israel. Okay, well, that's just how the world works. I mean, if you are a smaller nation in a vulnerable position for survival, it's probably in your best interest to latch onto one of the world's major powers and gain some influence within that political system, or within their political system. And that is exactly what Israel did with the United States. But Israel the Israeli government views the Iranian government as basically a mortal enemy that it must do away with, or it must defeat to finally secure the safety of its people and its existence. Iran is, I'd say, the chief funder of the Axis of Resistance, the Palestinian resistance, and the Israeli government feels that they cannot compromise with the Iranians, and they're not safe until the Iranian government is overthrown and all of the funding that goes to Israel's enemies is cut off. Well, that's how Israel views it. Now, unfortunately, because Israel has so much pull in the United States, in regards to Iran, Israel does not have the military capabilities to actually get into a direct confrontation with Iran and defeat them without the help of the United States. I think Benjamin Netanyahu is hoping that Donald Trump, again, like Netanyahu doesn't care about Trump's legacy. He doesn't care if Trump is seen as a peacemaker, and he doesn't really care if Trump is relevant in politics ever again. Trump is useful at the moment. Now, like I'm saying, unfortunately, Trump's policy in regards to Iran is influenced heavily by Israel. Israel does not want peace with Iran. Israel wants war with Iran. Now, I think Trump is hoping that his threats of military action against Iran have some kind of, can force Iran back to the negotiating table, so that maybe they can work out a nuclear deal that Donald Trump feels is more advantageous. The problem is, I don't think the Israelis want that. The Israelis want that government gone. They want Iran, despite the fact that Iran did sign the non-nuclear proliferation treaty, and has stated that it does not make nuclear weapons and will not make nuclear weapons. Israel doesn't want to take that chance. I don't think a nuke would ever be used on Israel directly, but a nuclear weapon is a major bargaining chip. It's a major deterrence. Nobody wants to directly attack a nuclear-armed nation. Israel does not want Iran to ever have that kind of bargaining chip, ever, and is willing to launch major airstrikes or get the United States into a direct confrontation with Iran to do that. Now, Trump's idea is, the United States is still the most powerful country in the world. We can still call the shots, so people should do what we say, or there will be consequences. But again, one of the issues with that is when you have a nation that's resolved to stand its ground and resolved to fight to the bitter end, well, then you just end up with a war. Trump's strategy in regards to making peace is based on the threat of force, in the hopes that threat of force puts an end to any kind of military action against the United States, because no one wants war with the United States. I think that's what peace through strength means to Donald Trump. Not that he wants war, but I think he's counting on the notion that nobody wants war with the United States. So if he makes demands, then other countries have to abide by those demands. I think what Trump wants to do long term in the Middle East is probably get some kind of regional version of the Abraham Accords to make a long-lasting peace between Iran, Saudi Arabia, Israel, and the rest of the Gulf states. And then I think at that point, Trump would probably feel safe to completely exit the region and pull the United States out of the Middle East completely. I think that's his long-term strategy. Will that work? I don't think so. I think Israel is too hell-bent if you will, on a direct confrontation with Iran. I think they have too much influence in the U.S. government, and I think the Iranians have resolved themselves at this point, despite it maybe being against their best interests, to stand their ground and resolutely resist what the United States is trying to impose on them. Iran also does have, I don't want to say the direct military backing of Russia. The relationship between Iran and Russia is not the same as Israel and the United States. Russia supports Iran and will trade with Iran and give weapons to Iran, and to give them a bit of an advantage, a little bit, to kind of create a counterbalance against the United States in the Middle East. But insofar as acting on their behalf like the United States would with Israel, no, it's not that kind of relationship. I think if it came down to it and there was a direct confrontation between Iran and the United States, I don't think Russia would offer direct support, or at least enough direct support to risk a confrontation with the United States. But the peace through strength initiative, I think, is going to be, at least in regards to Iran, completely hamstrung by the influence of Israel. Like I said, Israel wants war with Iran. It wants Iran, I don't want to say wiped off the map, but it wants that government gone and something else in its place. It wants a regime change, like it did with Syria. And it doesn't really care how that happens. And it's banking on the United States to be the one to initiate that regime change. I don't think Donald Trump wants that, but again, I think he's being pushed into a position due to Israeli influence, and I think some ignorance within his own cabinet. In regards to, there's still I don't want to say a heavy neocon influence in the Trump administration, but it's still there. Much of their foreign policy, I think, is based upon a misguided view of geopolitics and the actual current strength of nations like Iran, China, and Russia. I think neocons tend to have a very juvenile and simplistic and immature view of the world and the interests that nations actually have. To neocons, when they talk about what other nations want, nations that they regard as enemies, it's usually just something comical, like, well, they want world domination, they want to control Europe, they want to destroy the United States and rule the Pacific and put people in concentration camps. I don't know. They don't really have like a realistic view of foreign policy, if that makes any sense. It just seems, I don't know, it's recycled Munich 1938 over and over and over again. But anyways, I feel like I'm rambling a little bit here, but there's a lot of influence like that in the Trump administration, which is why I think, again, when it comes to making peace between Russia and Ukraine, I don't want to say Trump's floundering a little bit, but he's getting stuck on a few things. Ultimately, I think the war between Ukraine and Russia, the Biden administration can be blamed for a lot of that. I think Trump is correct that if he was in office, that war would not have happened. But the Biden administration has created such a mess in that war, and I think the Ukrainian government has become such a Frankenstein, if you will, that they will not capitulate to Russia, even if Kiev was firmly in Russia's hands and all they had left was a small chunk of western Ukraine as a holdout. They still wouldn't. Ardent, hardcore Ukrainian nationalists, under no circumstance, I think, would be willing to surrender to Russia. And I think that these people being emboldened and given weapons and near unlimited funding, I think, was a mistake. I think it makes peace extremely difficult to achieve. I don't think Trump could realistically put a stop to this war. He definitely can't bully Russia into accepting terms that it would find unacceptable in the long run. Russia, again, is one of the three major world powers, and the United States doesn't have the leverage over Russia that it used to have. So Trump would need to find a different approach. Simply making threats or using economic leverage, achieving peace to that kind of strength, doesn't really seem possible in Ukraine either. And again, in regards to Ukraine, I think Trump is getting some bad advice. it's becoming increasingly obvious. And again, I'm not saying this because I support it or think it's a good thing, but I think the only way for the Ukraine war to end at this point, realistically end, is either the complete military or the complete destruction of the Ukrainian military and its rout, which would cost a lot of Russian lives and untold masses of Ukrainian lives. I'm not saying that's a good option. The collapse of the government in Kiev, some kind of coup, and a government that would sue for peace with Russia. As far as getting some kind of negotiated settlement out of it now, I don't think Trump can coerce either side into doing it. I think the Ukrainians feel like they have nothing to lose at this point. And the Russians have become so hardened against sanctions, and they know their own military strength, and they know that the United States is not going to get into a direct confrontation with Russia, that they don't really feel the need to bend on some of these demands. So I think if Trump wants his policy to be peace through strength, then I think Donald Trump would need to redefine what that means. That would make more sense in the American sphere of influence on using American power to keep peace. But in regions of the world that are far outside of the legitimate American sphere of influence, I think it's much more difficult for the United States to throw its weight around to achieve peace. So I think Donald Trump would need to redefine what peace through strength means and how he should go forward in regards to seeking peaceful resolutions to ongoing conflicts. But anyways, that's all I wanted to talk about today. I'll be back Saturday with another video. If you did enjoy this content, please drop me a like and please subscribe. And if you have any feedback to give, please leave me a comment. I will try to answer those as soon as I can. Well, everyone have a good day, and thank you.